invisible front. When waves of bombers darkened the European sky, men on the ground swung into action behind the barrels of their anti-aircraft guns. These soldiers lived and died in the shadows. They rarely appeared in headlines, yet they bore the weight of defending their cities. By the end of the war, Germany's Flak arm numbered more than 1 million personnel. Almost half were civilians, prisoners of war, foreign workers or teenagers pressed into service. Some volunteered out of conviction. Many were mobilized straight from school desks. From the moment they donned a helmet, they faced death, not on a far-flung battlefield, but under the burning skies above Berlin, Hamburg or the Ruhr. Scale of the system. In mid-1944, the German air defense network fielded 2,655 heavy gun batteries and 1,612 light gun batteries. There were 10,930 88mm guns, another 4,157 big guns of 105 and 128mm, and more than 30,000 rapid-fire 20 and 37mm pieces. Gunners learned ballistics, fuse settings, and the use of complex rangefinders. Their weapons were accurate but cumbersome. Moving a heavy battery took hours. Maintenance was constant. In 1944, as Allied raids intensified, Germany lost an average of 380 88mm guns every month to wear and enemy fire. An astonishing rate of consumption that reveals how fierce the duel became. Towers and fields. Flak batteries were everywhere. In major cities, the Luftwaffe built concrete fortresses known as flak towers. These monoliths bristled with guns, radar dishes and searchlights. They doubled as air raid shelters for thousands of civilians and dominated the urban landscape. In the countryside, crews scraped firing platforms into fields and stacked sandbags around their guns. Sometimes they simply rolled the weapon onto a meadow and camouflaged it with netting. Allied reconnaissance quickly learned to recognize the telltale geometry of these positions. Bombers targeted them relentlessly. Men at the guns endured constant explosions. The fiery curtain they hurled upward came back down on them as jagged steel rain. Youth recruits. In early 1943, Hitler signed an order drafting entire school classes into air defense service. Teachers watched as 15-year-old boys marched out of their classrooms to become Luftwaffenhelfer, Air Force helpers. By 1944, the Flak arm contained 660,000 male soldiers and 450,000 female auxiliaries. Girls from the League of German Girls operated predictors and searchlights. Many helpers were from occupied countries or bombed-out German cities. In the final phase of the war, flak batteries became priority targets for Allied aircraft. Pilots knew that neutralizing the guns opened the way for their own bombers. Teenagers and young women found themselves on the front line of this invisible war. Weapons and technology. The 88mm flak gun was legendary. Conceived to shoot down planes, it proved equally deadly against tanks and bunkers. During the Spanish Civil War, casualties among crews of 88mm guns were second only to bomber pilots because the guns were often deployed close to the front. In World War II, these guns were wrapped in camouflage and mounted on concrete pedestals or lifted onto towers. Alongside the 80s, heavier 105 and 128mm pieces hurled shells into the stratosphere, while 20 and 37mm cannons created lethal curtains at lower altitudes. Fire control relied on an intricate network of rangefinders, acoustic locators and radar. Information flowed to mechanical computers that calculated fuse timing and lead angles. When systems worked, a battery could bracket a bomber formation with bursts at precisely calculated heights. A day under fire. What did a normal day look like? The siren wails, men sprint to their posts, searchlights pierce the night, orders crackle across field telephones, altitude 3,000 meters, sector northwest, fire. Barrels belch flame and smoke, steel shells hiss into the darkness. The air smells of burning cordite and diesel. hands are coated with grease, ears throb from the concussion. In daylight raids, the yellow blossoms of shell bursts hang motionless in the sky, mocking the gunners below. Shrapnel rains down on their helmets. After a few hours, some stumble away with bleeding wounds. Others never leave the emplacement. Women at the guns. Flak girls became another wartime phenomenon. Thousands of women replaced men as computer operators, telephone controllers and predictors. They jotted down numbers, cranked wheels and relayed commands. Many were from occupied territories or German towns reduced to rubble. They endured the same hell as the men, but received little recognition. Allied pilots knew that taking out command posts would blind the guns, so they often attacked these exposed positions. Many female helpers died before they even realized the danger. For decades, their stories remain buried in family memories. People and stories. Veteran testimonies reveal the drama better than statistics. One example is Günther Vogel, a Berlin teenager drafted to an 88mm battery at 16. He recalled longing to join the Luftwaffe, but instead finding himself behind a rangefinder. He grew up enamored with English literature and felt torn. We admired the English, and then we had to shoot at them. Such paradoxes were common. Many gunners hated the war, yet did their duty. Wolf pits in the sky. Defended sectors over cities were known as flak fields. For Allied crews, they were zones where the density of fire was so great it seemed one could lower landing gear and taxi across it. In October 1943, American airmen dubbed Bremen Flak City and joked that if you dropped your wheels, you could taxi on the bursts. Each little black puff in the sky signified a timed explosion that flung jagged fragments through thin aluminium skin. Bombers responded by dumping ton after ton of explosives, each of which could obliterate a gun crew in an instant. Anti-aircraft positions thus became priority targets, and death there was commonplace. Wear and destruction. Flak guns were worked to the limits. Designers introduced new barrels and fuses, but the tempo of raids kept climbing. Thousands of shells were needed to bring down a single bomber. Worn barrels split or exploded. Technical losses were staggering. In 1944 alone, an average of 300 88mm guns were lost each month due to overuse or destruction. This meant that a surviving crew might operate 3 different barrels in as many months. The armaments industry could not keep pace. Obsolete First World War guns and captured French or Czech pieces were pressed into service. These stopgaps reduced accuracy and increased danger for crews. Command and control. Despite the chaos, the air defense system was a sophisticated machine. Warnings from radar, sound locators and spotters were passed to command centres. Officers decided which batteries to engage and when. Crews followed orders precisely to avoid friendly fire. Flak towers and field batteries housed mechanical directors, analog computers that calculated lead angles and fuse settings. Values appeared on dials, which Luftwaffenhelfer scribbled and transmitted to gun layers. When communication broke down, officers aimed by eye. Mistakes cost lives, yet in the frenzy, mistakes were inevitable. The high price. How many died? Precise numbers are elusive. Flak arm archives were scattered or destroyed. We know that by 1944, the anti-aircraft artillery counted around 1,110,900 personnel, and that 44% were civilians and teenagers. Historians estimate that thousands were killed or wounded during raids. Thousands more perished in direct hits, and others succumbed to their injuries after the war. In some batteries, only 1 in 5 men survived. The level of loss rivals that of submarine crews. Equipment losses also illustrate the scale. More than 7,488mm guns were lost between 1942 and 1944. With resources dwindling, Germany could not replace such losses. End of the struggle. By spring 1945, many batteries had run out of ammunition. Guns fell silent as Allied troops advanced. Teenagers in Luftwaffenhelfer uniforms threw their helmets into ditches and fled. Girls who had turned cranks days earlier walked home across a ruined landscape. Some crews were shot out of hand. Others marched into POW camps. For decades, official histories focused on pilots and tank crews. Only recently have historians illuminated the fate of those who stood on the ground and tried to hold up the sky. Memory and lesson. The story of Germany's Flak artillery is a story of fragile lives caught in the gears of war. It is about teenagers, women and elderly men who, with no real choice, looked up at an endless sky and waited for the thunder of bombers. Their contribution remains contested, but their sacrifice is undeniable. Understanding this hidden war helps us appreciate the price of peace. Think about them the next time you hear fireworks crack or walk past an old flak tower. Share in the comments if your family has memories of someone who watched the skies. This video is intended solely for educational and documentary purposes. It contains no ideology or propaganda. This is a documentary chronicle. Every word comes from the archives. Every event is real. No ideology,